I, so, so welcome everybody. I am so glad to see all of you here and to know a little bit more about myself. This is a very nice turnout, and I'm glad that you're all here to take part of this. So I want to start it off with a pretty easy icebreaker. Does anyone here, with a show of hands, know anyone with autism besides me? Okay, almost everybody in this room. Now, because of that, do you know what autism is? Okay, that's perfectly fine because sometimes even I don't know. But this is why we're here to kind of learn and educate ourselves a little bit more about it. So, autism is a little bit complex, and that's perfectly understandable because autism is not necessarily the same thing for everybody. Take, for instance, with me, I have many different things that I can do pretty well on my own that some of my other friends who are on the spectrum can't really do as well. And that's nothing against them. It's just something that is a little bit different with all of us. So to try and explain that, autism is very much, as it's been defined, as a neurological disability, meaning it's going to affect the nerves, it's going to affect the way that we interact and we see the world in different ways. So with me, sometimes a lot of noises are a lot louder than what most people would think. So if you hear a loud whistle, obviously that's going to be really annoying at first. With us, it's sometimes very painful, especially with me when I was growing up. I couldn't stand it when I was around lots and lots of people and lots of commotion, which is kind of odd thinking about it now that I'm up here standing talking to all of you. There's also other aspects of autism that are pretty prevalent, which is also taking in on social cues and social interactions, which again is also very, very with me being up here. But with me, I've learned through many different things, especially with me being in theater, to actually be able to communicate and be able to be up here and talk with other people. Because when I was younger, I wouldn't be here, I would be off in that corner doing something else. And there's a lot of people like myself who are still that way. And that's, again, perfectly okay. And like I've also said too, autism is very different for everybody, which is why it's called a spectrum. And I know because that's a little broad and a little bit hard to grasp, it's not necessarily an easy thing to explain. So with how things have been defined now, calling it a spectrum is a lot easier to say because when you look at it on a scale, it's a little bit hard because you could say somebody is on this lower end of the scale, meaning they need more attention, whereas somebody who's on a higher scale doesn't need as much. And that's not necessarily true either, because if you try to balance out on a scale, sometimes even with the weights, something isn't quite right. So we call it a spectrum because we're all different and we all have different needs and all have different focuses. So with me, there's a lot of different things about me that are kind of interesting. One of the biggest things is I'm a picky eater. I have a very huge thing with textures. Certain food textures I just don't agree with, and my body will let me know immediately if it doesn't agree with me, where I will have a gag reflex happen. And it's nothing against the cook, it's nothing against the food. My body just can't agree with it. The biggest one for me is a lot of potatoes, which is very, very odd because I like French fries. But when I eat something like cheesy potatoes or mashed potatoes, all of a sudden that reflex kicks in and I just can't deal with it at all. Which makes it really difficult for me because if I go to social situations and there's food present, if there's food that I'm not going to be able to eat, I just don't eat. And sometimes looks really troubling for a lot of people, but again, it's me. While something else is I have a hard time describing things, which talking about autism is very much that case. Trying to describe everything is not necessarily going to be easy for me because with me, I have a very black and white way of looking at different things. So if I try to explain something that's a little bit more in detail, sometimes it's hard for me to actually get all of those words out. The other thing too is sometimes I have a hard time taking direction and a hard time understanding different things that are brought to my attention. So one of those big things is, I use this as a classic example. I used to work at a dairy and I was given a lot of things from my boss to do. And one of those big things was to clean the ice cream machine. Every day when I would get in to start my shift. And you would think it would be pretty easy, except there were a lot of different things going on and a lot of different things that were happening all at once. And I didn't get quite a good enough explanation of different things. So I would constantly be calling my boss every single morning, hey, I don't think I got this quite right. Could you kind of tell me again? And at that point, my boss got very, very frustrated with me. And obviously I wasn't cleaning the ice cream machine very much after that. But that was okay because that was one stressful thing off of my mind. But at least I was glad that somebody else was able to understand it a little bit better and try to explain it a little bit with me. And that's something that a lot of people who are working with someone with autism have to understand, is that you will get frustrated and you will get upset. But the key thing is you have to have patience and you have to have care. So let's actually talk about kind of how that happened with me in my life. So when I was born, my mother noticed that I was a pretty great baby. I didn't cry, I didn't fuss a lot, and I was pretty quiet. And then one of my caretakers noticed something a little bit interesting about myself and mentioned to my mom that, you know, you should get him evaluated and see if there's something. And at that point, I was diagnosed as developmentally delayed, which means that even though my mind is at a 33-year-old age, my mind itself operates more at a lower end of the age bracket. So with me, I'm probably around maybe my 18-year-old age for maturity in my mind. But it could be different for everybody else. And again, that's kind of the whole message from today is it's okay. So that was back when I was maybe about, I want to say a year and a half from what I remember, from what I've been told. 18 months. And later on down that road, I was diagnosed as autistic. And that was an eye-opener because a lot of parents, when they're told something about their child, they don't necessarily want to take that in. And my mother, of course, was not very happy about the whole thing and thought, much like every other parent, there's nothing wrong with your child. But that's the wonderful thing, is that we're all very different. All learn from. And with my mother, she would get very, very frustrated with me because, as she has been telling me as I've been young, she is the most impatient person she knows. And I would take my time trying to figure things out in the world, and she would just get so frustrated with me and just say, oh, come on, just do it. And I couldn't just do it. And there was a moment where my mother actually started breaking down and just crying and feeling so frustrated and defeated with trying to raise me and trying to have me live a quote unquote normal life, which which is not necessarily easy for someone like myself. And my brother, who was staying at the time, said one of the most profound things for my mother. And it was a life-changing moment for her, because it's really changed the way I look at her and the way that she looks at me. My brother at 13 years old said to my mother, you know, Ma, maybe the reason Andy is autistic is because God wanted to teach you patience. And it might have sounded pretty insulting at the time for my mother, but it made her think and realize that she did need to have patience, and she did need to take a little bit of a slower pace with me, because if you try to rush something with me, and especially somebody who is autistic, it's not going to get done quickly, and it's not even going to get done very well. Case in point with me, there was a moment when I was very, very young, and I was given direction on something, and it just didn't click. And there was a bit of a commotion. My mother came to my rescue at the time, and everything was good, but it was a really, really scary moment, and I didn't get a whole lot of good direction at that time. Which, case in point, when you're telling me something, sometimes you need to take it in a different way, because as I'm sure a lot of you have noticed, if you try to explain something or try to ask something of somebody, sometimes you'll just see them with that deer in the headlights look and the buffering happening on their monitor face, and you have to try and figure out, okay, did they get what I just said, or are they still trying to figure it out? And with me, if that's definitely the case, sometimes you have to take it in a different way. Sometimes you have to explain it in a different way. Sometimes I jump all over the place. So again, with that, trying to explain things is very, very important. Trying to take your time to explain different things is also very important. And one of those big things is that if I'm learning something for the first time, that's usually how I'm learning. So when my mother was raising me, she always took very, very special care about how she taught me to do certain things. Because she knew that if she did it one specific way, that's how I would do it. And one of those big things was tying my shoes. To this day, I can't tie my shoes unless I'm sitting down on the floor or sitting on a chair, because that's how I was taught how to tie my shoes. Because I was sitting down at the time, and my mom took the time to show me, and granted, it took me a long time to tie my shoes because it wasn't necessarily an easy thing to do. But one of the cool things that I still remember, and my mother still remembers, is that when I was in grade school, I went to a school that was very, very inclusive of everybody. And one of the big things that my mother remembers is that when there was a big gym activity that she was there at school for, she noticed that when I was struggling to get my shoes tied to run around the gymnasium, a lot of kids who had already tied their shoes were getting really, really excited about having that opportunity to come over and help me get my shoes tied. Which brings another big thing about social interactions. And this is something that's also very, very big with a lot of kids who are on the spectrum, is that we have a hard time socializing, and we have a hard time understanding social cues, because again, we have a different way of thinking. And with me, I still struggle with this. I can't read body language, and I can't understand certain social cues that don't necessarily require language. So when somebody is trying to do a particular movement with their shoulder or particularly their head, I might not necessarily pick up on that cue. And especially with me, when I talk about different things that I'm really, really into, sometimes I won't notice that somebody is on that particular topic. So keep in mind, if I'm starting to talk about something that I really, really love, if you're getting bored with it, I'm probably going to keep going. But that other aspect too, and this is also a very big thing that I always talk about, is something that's called stimulation. And there's different moments where there are things that make us feel relaxed, make us feel good inside. And with us, we have to be careful about how much we balance that, because if we have too much, we can become overstimulated. And sometimes that can be a really, really hard thing for us to do. And like with me, if I'm given too much to do in one instance, my brain will become extremely overloaded. My senses will become extremely overloaded. And eventually, much like a car engine that's been running for so long, eventually it blows and shuts down for a moment. And with me, that's especially a thing that happens, where I shut down. I don't have any emotion, I don't have any feeling, and I just can't think about anything. And it becomes really, really challenging when I have it happen at work, I have it happen at home, and I have it happen in just different social circles. And as much as I love to hang out with friends, as much as I love to do different things that I love to do, sometimes when my mind is just not there and not focused on anything, it's really, really hard for me to tell people that. Because if I try to rush back into it and my mind isn't ready for it, it just makes the situation worse for me mentally and emotionally. And I struggle with it a lot, but I've learned to find ways to mitigate that by just sitting and meditating, sitting and breathing, especially deep breathing exercises, and just sometimes not even doing anything, just looking out at the world, looking at some video that just brings me comfort, or just listening to music or sounds in the world that bring me comfort. It's not necessarily always an easy fix, but it is something that does help if you give time for it. And that's definitely something for a lot of people who are on the spectrum. Do all sorts of different things for trying to calm down overstimulation. Some people even have people who are overstimulated talk about things that they really, really love, because that brings them back to focusing on just being happy, trying to not think about all these other things that are bringing them stress. And sometimes that helps with me, other times it doesn't. But it all depends upon the day, all depends upon the situation, and most of the time I have a lot of wonderful, wonderful people that are helping me out through my life to get me to where I am. And one of those people that my parents will remember to this day and still love wholeheartedly was the first quote unquote teacher, I guess, that I had in my life, that would come over to our house and would teach me different things to get me ready for getting involved in the school environment. And she would bring over different things for me to touch and to feel and to get an idea of what things would be like on all those different senses. And when you're autistic, your senses are kind of at a different level. like with me, certain touches feel fantastic. Others are really, really hard for me to grasp. And if I really don't like the feeling of something, I will try my hardest to not even touch it at all. Same thing again with scents. And my mother has shown me this time and time again. She's extremely sensitive to different smells. And with me, we have kind of a connection on that, because if she's extremely sensitive to a particular scent, I will do everything in my power to try and make sure that I avoid that scent and make sure that she doesn't even come close to that scent. Again, there's a lot to try and explain, but again, this is why we're here. So, kind of moving forward on everything in my life, what brought me to this point where I'm standing in front of you and talking to all of you, feeling comfortable to be where I'm at. And it all boils back down to one specific night that my father decided, let's take a trip. We're going to go check out a shop. My father had read an article about people who are on the spectrum being exposed to karaoke and how it made every single one of them become a totally different person. And my father and my mother had tried so many different things to try and get me to do something that would bring us all together as a family, because sometimes it was really, really hard. I had my own thing that I was really, really into, but I just didn't really want to deviate away from what I was already used to knowing of how this is supposed to be done. So we went out, we took a look at a karaoke machine that my father had looked at and talked to the owner about, and we brought it home. I sang one song, and it was enough for me that night. But my father and my mother tried to encourage me, helpfully, of course, that you should try and sing a little bit more. Maybe try another song that you really do. And pretty soon, one song a night became 3 songs a night, sometimes even 10 songs. And pretty soon, I'm singing the whole entire day. And at that point, both of them realized that I had a gift, that I had a voice that I should try as hard as I can to nurture that talent and nurture that love of being able to find music and song. So I joined the choir at my grade school, and then out of a crazy idea, I decided to audition for the musical at my middle school the year following. And when I told my mother, she thought I was nuts for doing it. It was even crazier when they actually cast me as one of the lead roles. And this was Guys and Dolls. I was cast as Harry the Horse, and then an understudy to Sky Masterson, which was also very funny because the year following, I was the understudy to that guy's part again for the role that that guy was playing. And at that point on, I started to discover that as I became more acquainted with music and theater and dancing, I realized that I needed to have a different kind of mindset when I was performing. I needed to be a little bit more social, and I needed to be a little bit more animated. And at that point, I started incorporating all those different emotions that I was taking from the characters I was playing and the songs I was singing. And I was incorporating that into my social life. And it was a huge eye-opener for me because I started being able to talk and learn more about myself and all of my different colleagues in my classes and all of my different friends that I didn't know I even had at the time, including a couple of bullies at the time when I was growing up in grade school that we ended up becoming friends afterwards because I started taking social cues and I had noticed that they were being bullied from other bullies later in life. And it was a huge moment for them because somebody was finally paying attention to them and finally feeling something that they didn't really feel before. Because my mother has always taught me that if someone is bullying you, maybe it's because they don't have something that they have in their life right now, and you should try and be friends with them. And it's hard for somebody young to feel that way, but it's also a moment where you start to feel a little bit different and start to look at things differently. And it was a moment where I started seeing things less and less black and white, even though I still look at things black and white. Now, when I got to high school, things were a much different thing when it came to theater because it was a much more higher level of acting. It was a much more higher level of patience. When I got into the school, I was immediately told that the only way that I could perform is if I was a resident in the school. But I could still be a part of the autism program, part of that school. And at that point, my father took everything in his power to make sure that I was going to be a part of this theater program and the autism program, because at the time, there was no other school within Minneapolis that had both accessible to me. It was either one, the other, or none of them. And we fought very, very hard to make that happen, and it was a big moment for me because I started changing mindsets for the theater community at my high school. And I didn't really get any lead roles, and I didn't really get any form of attention because the theater community at my high school was very, very tricky. A lot of them didn't really want to welcome me. A lot of them really didn't want to mesh well with me because it was different. And I had a different way of thinking than all of them. I did have a couple of friends within the group, but the majority of everybody there just didn't really want to associate with me in a certain way. To the point where there were some student-run productions that were happening at school that I wasn't even invited to even help set up staging, set up lights for even running time. And I thought that that was very, very odd and very, very frustrating because I wanted to do all of this. This is my passion, my love, and I wasn't even being able to do even the simplest of things. So when I went to my final audition and I was told that I wasn't in and wasn't asked to do anything for it, I took the knowledge of my dad being the type of go-getter that he is, and I came home to my mother and said, that's it. I'm gonna make a sign and I'm gonna protest. And we printed out, I don't know how many flyers, and made a giant cardboard sign that I recently discovered in my cleaning, which I still hang on to because of the impact that it had in my high school. And I walked around on my lunch break, holding the sign and handing out flyers and saying that it was prejudice. Because there wasn't a whole lot of female students involved. There wasn't a whole lot of students of color being involved. And of course, for me specifically, there weren't a whole lot of people disabled that were being involved. And that was extremely frustrating, and I just didn't want to take no anymore for an answer. And it became a huge talking point in my senior year of, wow, you know, maybe this is really prejudice. We should start thinking about this. Even though there were also some people that were arguing, oh no, we let everybody in. We let everybody have a chance to do everything with our shows. And then came the following year after I had graduated, and one of my friends who was a freshman at the time told me that they're shutting it down. And it all came from one specific show. Somebody had hosted auditions for one show, and almost the entire disabled student body came to audition. And not a single one of them was allowed in for anything, wasn't even cast for a single bit part. And one of the teachers had to finally come over and ask, okay, why do you not want anybody of this particular group a part of this show? And they instantly said, I don't want to work with disabled individuals. And that was that. So from my one little protest, even though it didn't work for me specifically, it was a big moment for everyone else that I had met. And it's still a big accomplishment in my life that if someone is messing with somebody that is like me or less fortunate than me, I will do everything in my power to try and make sure that they can have as much support and love that I have in my life. And that's a very important thing for me, especially now that I'm older, especially now that I'm trying to be my own self, is that I have to have a support network. I have to have people who know me. I have to have people who love me, and I have to have people who understand me. And even though you might not understand everything about me, as long as you can still respect me as a person, I will be very, very thankful for whatever it is you do. Which is why I'm so thankful for my parents and everything that they do for me. I am so thankful for some of my friends in my life that have done even some of the littlest things like pay for my bus fare or pay for my dinner to somewhere that I somehow didn't have enough money for, or just simply just saying hello and giving me a hug. And I still think about so many people in my life that I've met that are like me or are less fortunate than me, who are also autistic, that don't have that support network. And it's extremely challenging. One of which, there's a friend of mine out in Ohio that didn't really have a support network with his family or his friends, and ended up having to have multiple different surgeries with his teeth and his body, and of course didn't really have anybody there except for maybe one person. And now all of a sudden I've been noticing that there have been a lot more people that have been coming to him, and his support network has been building to a point where he now feels comfortable just being able to walk out of the house and buy a cup of coffee and not have to worry about, is this going to affect my dental bill? Is this going to affect my rent? So where does that bring us now? With me, I'm still struggling with a lot of different things, such as being a picky eater, such as dealing with social cues. I'm better now that I've done some acting and picking up on different things from factors are supposed to react in different scenes and cues. But I can still feel glad that I have such high faith in so many people here at Valley as well. Because I didn't really have that great of a connection with faith growing up. And I didn't really have any sort of good feeling towards church, not necessarily against the messages, but because people didn't quite understand everything. And when I came to Valley, I was so happy and so thankful to see so much inclusivity for people who are disabled, for people who are of different ethnicities, and of people who are different color. And I'm still thankful of everything that we do in practice, in everything that we do in interaction, and everything that we do in just care. So with that, I do have a lot of literature over here on the table that some of you can take home. There are a couple of organizations that are constantly working towards making support networks and making things a lot easier for both parents and people who are on the spectrum. One of the organizations are local here, the Autism Society of Minnesota, or as they like to say with their acronym, AWESOME. They've been around since the 70s, and they've been working tirelessly with communities to try and make sure that autism is understood a little bit better and is also accessible for people who are on the spectrum. Because there's one thing that my parents always remembered about when I was younger is that they had a choice. They had a choice of putting me in an institution with other people who were disabled and autistic, or they had the option of mainstreaming me and being part of the rest of the community with a little bit of help on the side. And that was the question that they always brought forth in their mind is, do you want to raise an autistic child in their world and have the world come around that? Or do you want to have an autistic child and live in our world and have everybody learn to love and respect others? And with them choosing the latter, I'm still very thankful for that. And I think that everybody else can learn from that choice as well, because it helps the rest of us learn so much more. The other organization, they don't have a location per se in Minnesota, but the Autistic Advocacy Network, which you can find on their website, autisticadvocacy.org, if you're on the board, is constantly having kind of the same thing with the Autism Society, but more focused on creating self-advocacy for people who are on the spectrum. Because sometimes it's hard for some of us to find that confidence, and some of us don't always have a karaoke machine to inspire us. So there's a lot of great information and a lot of great different resource points that everybody can learn from. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor to questions, and thank you for having me again.
I do have a microphone, so if you have a question, I'm gonna pass the microphone to you because we are recording this, and so we want the folks who maybe watch the recording later be able to hear what your question was for Andy. I will speak to Awesome. I have gone to their gala every year for probably the past 22 years. If you want to have an awesome night, go to the Awesome Gala, which I think is coming up here pretty soon in May. You get to hear from individuals who live with autism, and the people who work in their offices when you call are living with autism, and they are just so great, and they're so inspirational as how they're just folks like us. You know, we're all a little neurodiverse, I think. So, you know, I can't speak enough good things about Awesome. So I'm glad you brought them up. They're here in Minnesota and we can really, they can use our support to have more allies out in the community who are not afraid to get to know somebody who's neurodiverse and walking somewhere in that spectrum. So, yeah, anyone have a question for Andy? All right.
Thanks for the presentation. What do you like about being on the spectrum? What are the things that you perhaps see as affinity?
That's sometimes a hard question to answer because I don't necessarily like to bring too much focus on my autism, but I would probably say one of the best things about being autistic for me is that I can really focus in on things and I have a pretty good memory about different things, which is how I was really, really excited when I got into acting because I was learning my lines 2 months before we were supposed to be off book, and I was already also learning everyone else's lines when I started. So I'm very, very happy sometimes about how much I can take in and retain. Sometimes I'm also afraid about how much I take in and retain. But it's always been an exciting thing for me because if I start learning something and start really getting into something, it can be something exciting for both me and other people who are involved with whatever it is.
Currently, what's your career?
So my career is still acting. The other thing that I do now too is I work optical retail as a receptionist out in Maple Grove. I used to do it out in Brooklyn Center, but that location closed and I had to think of other places that I could go. But thankfully, my boss, who had transferred to our Maple Grove location, was adamant and screaming with the higher ups, I want Andy on my team because I love how positive and I love how focused he is as an individual. And there's been many, many moments on the job where she has picked up on things where I start feeling overstimulated about different things. And she has known when to say, Andy, step away. And it's been very, very hard for me to find bosses like that because sometimes some bosses don't necessarily take the time to just have patience to understand why I'm not getting something, or sometimes even brush off that I am autistic, because that's something very, very frustrating for being an autistic individual when somebody says you don't look autistic or you act autistic. Because again, it's a spectrum. We're all different in how we present ourselves.
What are some things, can you guys hear me? What are some things that you do to relieve stimulation? Mediums?
So some of the big things, again, like I said, were sometimes put on new age or solitude music. Sometimes I listen to waves from Lake Superior because it brings so much comfort to both me and my parents with how many memories we have on the North Shore. I also like to listen to sounds of birds, and again, deep breathing exercises are key. But some of the other things too is I like a lot of different games, and so sometimes if I am able to direct that tension to something else like biking or video games or even something like solitaire, it just makes things just feel a little bit better for me overall, and sometimes it takes me back to something better.
Thanks for your presentation today. It's been really good. Thanks for sharing your experiences. So I have a question. So, maybe you just want to understand some of the experiences you've had. You mentioned a couple of things struck me. You talked about some really difficult reactions to loud noises. You talked about multiple people in a room where there's multiple conversations going on. I experienced both of those. Carol would know. Loud noise with even a person. I once had an experience that down in Florida with a police officer. I had to tell him to stop. I did something wrong, capturing wrong. He did. Carol was to stop yelling. I couldn't stand it. And we were at home. She was drop off the water, so I jumped. And I have no idea why I'm doing that. It's not, I'm not controlling it. It's just a neurological reaction that I have zero control. If I'm in charge of a meeting or something, in multiple conversations, I also have to stop and say, hey, there's one conversation at a time. I just can't track with it. So I don't know if that's some of those same things you've experienced, but at least maybe this is just old age of me, but it's seeing that stuff that you're just, I can't control.
And I won't say I experience the same things as you, because it's different for everybody. But sometimes I do jump with certain sudden sounds. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't even hear it. Sometimes my mother is frustrated with me, like, you didn't hear that? So I can't say things would be the same for us, but sometimes there are things that other people that I've met who aren't autistic like me have also said, holy cow, that was really loud. I can sympathize with that. So again, it's different for everybody, but sometimes we have a common ground.
So are there some foods that overstimulate you?
Actually, that is a very good question. That's something else that I did also forget to mention is that sometimes when I have different foods on my plate, I don't like them touching and interacting with other things because I just don't want the taste of my macaroni and cheese on my bread and chicken. So I get very, very finicky about that. I get very, very frustrated when it does happen by accident. But I would probably say that's probably the only thing that really gets me overstimulated is when I start mixing different flavors of different things that I didn't necessarily mix. Another thing too is mint. Peppermint and strong mint, I really can't handle because again, it overstimulates my entire sense of taste. Oh, yes. And sometimes how I cut my pizzas too is also a particular thing. Because if it's in a particular shape, I'm great. If it's a shape that I'm not necessarily comfortable with, it's a little funny.
You can't cut your pizza
Oh, right.
after it's touched.
I forget about that. So I have to have my pizza cut in a certain way. It's got to be cut in a triangle shape, or it just doesn't.
What's up? No.
We'll talk later.
I'm gonna give
You
up on
cut
it.
your pizza first,
Oh,
because if the pizza cutter has cut a
Right.
different kind of pizza,
So-
you can't deal with
Thank
it.
So, right, so again, the mixing of different flavors. if I'm cutting a pizza that is different from the one that I'm having, I have to rinse the blade off or have it be cut before everybody else because I get really finicky about the cheeses and the other ingredients that are from the other pizza touching mine. But I guess that's a good way of practicing food safety in the kitchen too.
We have another one.
Just curious, as a person growing up, one of the things that you normally learn how to do with this kind of process, driving a car. Did you have, how was that?
That's still something that I'm working on. It's,
Okay.
yeah, the incident that I described earlier about me not getting quite enough direction was, we were at a go-kart track. And the guy who was getting everything started didn't really explain everything with gas, brake, and I came in and I didn't quite know when to put on the brake. And I slammed my go-kart into the back end of another kid's go-kart. And it's been kind of a bit of a traumatic, but also a very funny memory for us, mainly because of how my mother reacted about the whole thing. But it's still a challenge for me, and it's still a little bit tricky for me, but I'm thankful for the support network that I have trying to encourage me to try and work harder at it.
It's not really a question, it's just a comment. I know for people, I have no desire ever even to try it.
I was just wondering, we and granddaughter lived with us, and there were issues with her and stuff. And all of it wasn't really well diagnosed, but I really, truly felt that she was in that spectrum. And one of the things she had was very noticeable, textures of clothing and seams in the shirts, and where the zipper should go, and what touches you, what doesn't touch you, and how many layers you can wear. And it doesn't matter if it's 987 degrees outside, because snowflake sounds good.
Yeah, I did have a little bit of that growing up too. Certain things that if it was really, really itchy, couldn't contain myself when I was scratching constantly. Again, also where certain things were positioned clothing wise also was very particular. And something else too is how I put my clothes on. Because some people, they can just throw on a shirt and figure everything else out. Me, I go through an ordered step. I put on my underwear, then my socks if I'm wearing socks for the day, and then my pants, then my shirt.
I would say the very same thing that I help me is like, in the morning, there was a very dry order of it. You can't cheat, you can't go and brush your teeth because suddenly the phone is ringing and I'm not right there, or she wants to talk. Then you start working.
Yes.
Yes, many frustrating mornings when he was young and we'd be in a hurry trying to get him ready, get out the door, get him to daycare, go to work. And that's when I realized, oh my God, things have to stay in order. Because, you know, he was starting to dress himself and he wasn't going fast enough. So I'm trying to help him. Whoops, I put his shirt on, but his socks weren't on yet. And he just would have a meltdown. He would strip down naked and have to start over because some piece of clothing got put on in a different order. And it was just like, yeah, those were the days where I just laid my hair out, realizing I have to slow down. I just have to let him do it how he needs to do. He would have a better day also.
And that's still something with me is that everybody fears change, but it's really frustrating for a lot of us who are on the spectrum because trying to deviate and change something is almost like throwing a monkey wrench into something and disrupting the entire balance of everything.
Giving pizza every Wednesday night.
Right. Like a specific routine of this is happening this time, every single time. If it's disrupted, broken, it becomes really frustrating. And trying to adapt and learn that it's okay to change it up every once in a while.
Try not to.
I've gotten better in some areas.
Yeah, and this is my question, this is just a comment, I have a nephew who's similar in age to you, but also with autism. And your self-awareness is amazing, and your ability to tell us about it is phenomenal. I just want to say thank you, and your support system of your parents is also just wonderful to hear. And I feel like I already understand my nephew better than I listen to.
Really comforting to hear because I still sometimes try and struggle trying to explain everything about myself because again, I have a hard time describing everything, trying to get the right words out because it might sound great in my head and then it comes out totally different. And then I have to try and play catch up and try to explain, no, that's not how I meant it. But that's the wonderful thing about my support network is that if they're with me and they notice that I said something a little bit off that didn't quite sound right, they're able to pick up on that and say something. Say, that didn't quite sound the way you wanted it to sound.
But no. Things
Oh,
like very literal.
yes. And that's something else too, is sometimes I take things a little bit too literally. Classic example. My mother and I were driving somewhere and she had to make a turn and there were some papers on the dashboard. And she told me, Andy, watch those papers, will you? Try to make sure that they don't fly out the window. Or
I
go on
didn't
the
say
floor.
that.
Just watch.
Just watch those papers. She meant it that way. She makes the turn. There go the papers all over. And she gets frustrated with me and says, what are you doing? I told you. And I said, yeah, watch those papers. So that's very reassuring. So thankful that you say that. And that's something that my mother is always so blessed to have about me is that she's been able to learn so much from me to be able to notice that with other people like me that have different circumstances.
And, okay, I have a question for you. So, how is autism diagnosed as a different, I mean, that's just right. I mean, so, and is there, it must be medical, it must be educational, it must be family, but.
It's
And then does it have anything to do with ADHD, or is there anything that's kind of together with that? Because it sounds like some of the same symptoms are.
Are you comfortable with that when you're walking in?
So that's kind of a funny thing is that that's been kind of a trend that has been noticed a lot recently is that a lot of people have been noticing a lot of similarities from ADHD and autism. And it's not necessarily to say that they're one and the same because there are very different things about ADHD that autism is not. But it is also very, very common to also see sometimes that people are diagnosed as both ADHD and autistic. It's not necessarily to say that they're one and the same, but sometimes it's just a thing that happens.
And OCD, sometimes they can have OCD diagnosis, and as far as how is it diagnosed,
Right.
there is an educational piece to the diagnosis, that school districts need to have a doctor's diagnosis. It does not equal an education diagnosis. A doctor's diagnosis does not equal an IEP with supports. You have to go through the educational diagnosis, which is a series of different tests, that they put the kids through to kind of figure out where speech and language fall, where, their fine motor, all the different kind of whole body things happening. And then from there, once the education piece is diagnosed, where some needs are, then they get set up with usually an IEP. Sometimes a 504 plan is enough. But usually an IEP for most kids early on. And then that's going to taper off as you get into high school. You'll see kids who are higher on the spectrum may just have a 504 plan, which is like an IEP, but less, they're not getting pulled out. The intervention, less than intervention.
Yeah. The things that I remember most of Andy and his diagnosis, from developmentally delayed to autistic at age 5 was the initial diagnosis, correct? Age 5. At that point, there were 16 different levels of the spectrum. And if you met 8 of those on the spectrum, you were considered autistic. Andy met 10 of 11, I believe, 10 to 11 of the spectrum. So he was labeled as high function, Asperger's syndrome, blah, 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 blah. Connie was all upset. Oh my God, he's autistic. I said, well, at least he's not developmentally delayed. We know what we're dealing with. So to look further into it, I have an older son who is ADHD. I have a son here with autism, 2 different mothers. There is a study that I read that said it is genetic between both ADHD and autism. And I believe there's a gene that is passed from the father. Here I have 2 children, and I would love to have my kids agree to all of us go in and be studied further to determine if this is true, because 2 different moms, 1 dad, ADHD, autism, maybe it is a gene. So we get an idea. I do not believe it is passed by immunizations and all of that, because then we'd all have it. I think one of the things too is, why do we have such a prevalence of autism coming on? Back when I was a child, we were all just labeled mentally retarded. If there was a problem, you were just mentally retarded. Now we have an idea. You might be mentally retarded, be ADHD, you might be ADD, you might be Downs, you might be autistic, you might be, oh my goodness. What kind of labels do we have? So
Yeah.
it's been a journey for all of us, and thank God I took it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For almost 50 years, our son's taught us a lot. What do you taught your parents?
Besides what I've already said, I've taught them quite a lot, but I think the biggest thing, especially for my mother, is patience and focus. Because being able to focus on different things about certain people, she's been able to read them a lot differently rather than just, oh, they're just that. That's fine. No, she actually starts reading different things a little bit about different friends that I have. She's constantly said that she would love to do more for people in situations than me, and knows how important it is for people to be surrounded by positive energy and supportive people in their life. My dad has learned, well, he's taught me a lot more than I've taught him, but sometimes it feels that. But I think probably the one thing that I've taught my dad too is just looking at things differently and trying to take things at a different pace or, because sometimes even now, sometimes he notices that if he says something or does something a certain way, sometimes it won't work or come off as how I should be reading it, and sometimes he apologizes, takes a step back and says, wait a minute, let me try that again.
I think that,
Yeah.
such a fun stuff. Every morning, the Jazzy woke up, I had to make sure I had this invisible umbrella, and I opened it. And we open the umbrella, you don't know what's on each one of those spines on that umbrella. And some days you get the full umbrella, and some days it's only one thing on the umbrella. And it was something that hasn't even been talked about or sort of the diagnosis or referred to as needing some help with this or that. It's just there, fell out of the umbrella. And for me, that's the way I felt. When you say living in the spectrum, I think the spectrum is an umbrella.
Yeah. Connie, go ahead to the mic.
I just want to say, a lot of people have heroes in their life. Probably gonna cry. I say this.
Try every time.
Andy is my hero. I look up to him. He has taught me so much. A lot of people take things for granted when the kids are growing up, they learn how to throw shoes, they learn how to, toilet training, and things, they just happen, it's just normal things. Everything that he has accomplished in his life is such a huge, it's a huge accomplishment because not everybody on the spectrum accomplishes this. It just, people take that for granted, but not everybody does. And to know where he came from, not being able to talk to people, he would, in a crowd like this, he would be under the chair. He just, just in pain. And when we first started doing karaoke, he would sit in a corner, hiding behind a book and reading. And it was his turn to get up to sing, and people noticed him, He would get up to sing, and he became this other person. It's like he was able to put himself in a different mindset. And he would walk through the crowd and he sang to people and everybody was just like. And when he was done singing, he's back. And people would try to talk to him and he'd be like. So what he has become from all those things, he is my hero. He has accomplished so many things, more things than we have ever dreamed he would. He's amazing. He's just amazing.
I think we're gonna wrap it up because it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. But as someone, I think maybe some of you know this about me. I spent 20-some years working with kids like Andy in Minneapolis, in an autism spectrum classroom. Started out with little ones, worked my way up to middle school through the years, and I have had the great privilege of seeing my kids grow up and graduate high school. And one of them recently was featured in the Star Tribune. His name is Michael Ingebretson. He's a fabulous artist. And I got to go visit him and see his work. And so it's just a testament to that. Folks with neurodiversity are just people. They're just people. They're on a spectrum, sure, on an umbrella, whatever you want to call it, but they're just people who walk through life with a different set of glasses sometimes than we do. But we also, as we had kind of heard this today, we were all saying, I do that too, or I can relate to that. So we share more in common with folks who are neurodiverse than we sometimes realize. And so just having a lot of grace and for their folks, because being a parent of a kid, Connie and Mark said, it's hard. It's hard to sit with the family when they get the diagnosis. and they have to make the plan. And, those people are out in the grocery store with their kids, having meltdowns. And the last thing they need is people glaring and judging eyes, but instead of, you got this, mom. You got this. I see you, mom. You're gonna be okay. Can I take the cart to your car for you while you scoop them up and carry them to the car, kicking and screaming? Because that's what people in the community need from the rest of us who are gonna be allies, is that they need us to just walk alongside with them and let them know that they're doing a good job. They're not failing in any sort of way because their kid is underneath the table during fellowship time instead of sitting there eating a donut with the other kids. It's just who they are. And it's our job to just love them as we love all the other kids. So that's my soapbox for this. So it's very fun for me to see, folks like Andy who they've been able to persevere. Really, it's about perseverance, right? To just keep pushing, doing the stuff that they need to do every single day. And they're just gonna be folks. So thank you, Andy, for teaching us that. Will be. So, yeah. We'll be on YouTube. Yeah.